Oh, hey, didn't see you there. Today, we're going to learn about Ronald Reagan. Let's get started. Hello. Today, we're going to be taking a look at one of the most prominent presidents of recent United States history. Ronald Reagan emerged in the 1980s and became the face for the resurgence of conservatism. Prior to running for president, Reagan was an actor where he starred in such movies as King's Row and New Rocky All-American. In April of 1942, Reagan was ordered into active military duty, but because of poor eyesight, he could not serve overseas. Skipping forward to Reagan's political rise, Reagan gained political notoriety with his speeches for Barry Goldwater in 1964. All of Reagan's viewpoints came together in his famous A Time for Choosing speech. With this speech, Reagan won over a large following of California Republicans with his views on how the government should be and strong communication skills. Reagan rode this popularity to win for the California governor's seat in 1967. Fast forward to 1976, Reagan decided to challenge incumbent Gerald Ford for the Republican nomination for president. Although he was unable to win, Reagan cemented his national popularity. In 1980, Reagan secured the Republican nomination for president and easily defeated the highly unpopular Jimmy Carter. While Jimmy Carter didn't pose much of a challenge for Reagan, Reagan still won over a new brand of conservatism that attracted a large following. Reagan attracted a wide range of different conservatives that previously had not been united under a single candidate. The evangelical Christians liked him because he was seen as representing family values, which they had thought had been under attack. Additionally, he attracted a strong libertarian following because of his small government rhetoric. Reagan even pleased the war hawks because of his strong anti-communism stance. Reagan was almost unilaterally loved by Republicans and even won over many former Democrats who had grown tired of Jimmy Carter and admired Reagan for his strong communication skills. Now on to his presidency. We're going to focus on two main parts that define his presidency: his economic policies, known as Reaganomics, and his hardline stance to communism. Now I'm going to hit off to my five-star general, Camryn, who is going to tell you about Reagan's battle with communism.
Thanks, Zach. So now it's time to talk about communism. Before Reagan became president, he once told someone, "Some people say that I'm simplistic, but there's a difference between being simplistic and having simple answers to complex questions." So with that in mind, I think the Cold War ends when we win and they lose. What do you think of that? One of the very first things he did as president to show that America wasn't afraid of the Soviet Union. In September 1981, he had 5 aircraft carriers and 300 ships deployed into the Norwegian Sea. This was the first time those forces had been in the area since World War II. They started doing mock attacks to show the Soviets that if they try to intimidate the U.S., we will fight back and will win. In 1982, he addressed the British Parliament with a plan and hope for the long term: the march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism-Leninism on the ash heap of history, as it has left other tyrannies which stifle the freedom and muzzle the self-expression of the people. This plan was to overwhelm the Soviets' global influence, enacting it by backing almost any and all anti-communist guerrilla and resistance movements against any communist-backed government. His most famous scene of fighting communism was in West Berlin on June 12, 1987, when he challenged the last Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the Berlin Wall. This speech got Gorbachev to reopen nuclear negotiations and tear down the Berlin Wall. Due to Reagan's strength in the fight against communism, he is seen as the president that put an end to communism. So now I'm going to throw it back to Zach so he can tell you about Reaganomics.
Welcome back. Now I'm going to talk to you about Reaganomics. Prior to Ronald Reagan's presidency, the economic landscape was in disarray. Under Jimmy Carter, a stagnant economy along with high inflation led to Americans not being able to buy things like gas, which people needed to get to work. To combat this, Reagan proposed a plan that became known as Reaganomics. Reaganomics, also known as trickle-down economics, were massive tax cuts, reduction of government spending, and deregulation of business. Reagan believed this would stimulate the economy and restore consumer confidence. With Reagan's signing of the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, top tax bracket saw a tax cut from 70% to 50%, while the lowest bracket saw a tax cut from 14% to 11%. In 1986, Reagan further reduced the top tax bracket tax rate to 28%. On the government side, Reagan did cut government spending. However, he increased the spending of the Department of Defense to $267 billion to $393 billion, which led to government spending only slightly decreasing. Reaganomics as a whole is still highly controversial when it comes to whether or not it did more good or bad. One thing that proponents point towards was a reduction in inflation from 12% to 4%. Additionally, his policies led to unemployment to fall from 7.6% to 5.5%. However, Reaganomics caused many problems with the economy. For one, with less income to the government, the national debt jumped considerably. Under the last year of Carter's presidency, the national debt was $997 billion, and by 1989 under Reagan, the debt was at $2.857 trillion. This came after promises by Reagan to balance the budget within his first year. Additionally, many of his tax policies contributed to an increasingly large income inequality. With the top tax bracket receiving the largest tax cuts, the rich got richer. Reagan and his team thought that the rich would invest more in the economy and with more money, which would result in the whole economy receiving a boost. This, however, did not happen. The rich who received the majority of the tax cuts did not invest back into the economy as Reagan thought they would. They saved the money or invested in higher end dealings. The middle and lower classes did not see much of this money from the upper class. Over the course of Reagan's tenure as president, the top 1% saw wages rise by 80%. The rest of the country, however, saw a 3% rise in wages. Now I'm going to throw it over to Caelan, who's going to talk about how Reagan is remembered and what his legacy is.
Thank you, Zach. And now it's time to learn about Ronald Reagan's legacy. Let's go. Woo! Let's talk about Reagan's legacy. Ronald Reagan restored Americans' patriotism during his presidency. He made the public believe in America's exceptionalism, and he restored conservative values in the United States. He was a man that ended the Cold War and helped unemployment fall and income rise. These are Reagan's great accomplishments, but there are many negative things that happened as well. Reaganomics is the main idea that was negative, but this really did not hurt his legacy overall. Reagan is the mold for every Republican candidate since his presidency. His legacy is engraved in society, just like JFK and FDR. Reaganomics did not work, yet George H.W. Bush continued to do the same thing when he was elected, and his son, George W. Bush, tried to do a version of Reaganomics 20 years later. Now, today, President Trump is looking to continue down the same path as his predecessors, and with his tax return, he will do a version of Reaganomics as well. The average American thinks of Reagan as a good president. Most people choose to look at Reagan's good side and acknowledge everything that he did and blur out some of the things that were not so good that he also did. His uplifting attitude and the fact that he was a nice guy, he even forgave the man who shot him because it's the Christian thing to do, made him appeal to the public. Reagan also saved the United States economically and socially. Inflation dropped and the people of the country had their pride restored while Reagan was president. You combine that with the fact that he got the Berlin Wall torn down and basically ended communism. This is the reason why every Republican candidate since Reagan wants to be like him. Most Americans love and respect him. And I'll leave you with a quote from Reagan's farewell address. "We made a difference. We made the city stronger. We made the city freer. And we left her in good hands." All in all, not bad at all. And so goodbye, God bless you, and God bless the United States of America. That's all we got, folks.
Thank you guys for watching. We hope you enjoyed it and hope you learned something about Ronald Reagan.
I'm Caelan, this is Zach, that's Camryn, and this is for Miss Fair's APUS class, period 7. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.